Welcome back to our series on Bob's House of Widgets and Zero Trust. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing great. Bob's House of Widgets is, of course, one of my more favorite things to talk about. It is my made-up company that I use as my joking example all the time, but it's taken on a life of its own. And today we're talking about their Zero Trust initiative, which is crazy because Bob's House of Widgets never thought that they were going to have a Zero Trust initiative.
That's right. That's right. They were a pretty traditional manufacturing company, a leading provider of electronic and electromechanical widgets. But recently, they embarked on this new digital transformation, in particular, to create this new consumer-focused line of smart widgets. So these are obviously electronic. They have custom software in them, and they're connected up to Bob's Cloud, which, of course, is running on one of the major cloud service providers. And it does all the amazing things that widgets do, and they're hoping to sell, tens of millions of them to consumers around the world. So Bob's excited about that. It's a big investment that the company's making, and a big bet on this as a new line of business. And Bob's never been a security guy. They never really had a huge security culture there, but they've had some minor security incidents over the past year or so, and it's made them really want to do this properly. And they also recognize that this is a brand new environment for them. They don't have a lot of operational experience using a major CSP or with this type of custom software development. So in our last episode, we talked about how Bob had convened the leadership team and stakeholders to kick off this Zero Trust initiative and get buy-in on that. And I know, Chris, that's something that we talked about has always been important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you do want to take and get buy-in from your executive team and your stakeholders just to make certain that they're all very aware. The other really interesting thing about BHOW, as we call it, Bob's House of Widgets, is that if there is ever a green field, this is kind of it, right? You're basically starting at ground zero. And when I talk about Zero Trust, and I know you and I both talk about Zero Trust a ton, I always use the hypothetical, you need 50 things to get there. And the example that I always use is that people, for the most part, are never starting at zero. You're starting at, 8, 10, 7, 6, 12, whatever the number is, because everybody organically has something in their environment that they're already doing, from either identity or data management or device management and whatever have you. So the idea that everybody is starting out with absolutely nothing is very, very rare. But this is one of those cases where our good friends at Bob's House of Widgets are literally starting out very much with nothing. This is a brand new universe for them. So that comes with its own set of challenges, but it also comes with the set where you're not having to worry about having to integrate a whole bunch of different things and do things that were suboptimal because of existing infrastructure or whatever have you. This is doing it right the first time, which I think that we all wish that we had the luxury of being able to do.
Exactly. So we're going to kick this off, and we're using the CISA Zero Trust Maturity Model pillars, that framework, as our structure for our discussion. And of course, the pillars in that are typically from left to right: identity and devices, networks, application and workloads, and data. And then there's the cross-cutting concerns on the bottom of automation and orchestration, visibility and analytics, and governance. And we're going to start with data, which we never do. And I think that's going to be a little bit refreshing. And it also ties into some of the approach mentioned in the NSTAC report, which is start from the inside out. So let's talk about data. And inside the system maturity model, they have a number of functions that or sub-functions within data. And I'm going to read them out here to frame up our conversation, and we'll kick it off. So they talk about data inventory management, data categorization, data availability, data access, and data encryption as the main components of it. So let's just have a conversation about those things, and how Bob, is or might be approaching that in this new world. You want to kick it off, Chris?
Yeah. So whenever I talk about, Zero Trust, one of the things that I always bring up is that from the research that EMA, the company I work for, has done, EMA found that when you are looking at the main motivators for companies looking to implement Zero Trust, data classification and data security rank either the number one or at least in the top 3 every single time. Everybody has data that they need to be able to reconcile. And I mentioned just a moment ago that our friends at Bob's House of Widgets are kind of starting with a greenfield. that might be, but no matter what organization that you are, even if it's in some paper filing cabinet somewhere, everybody has data.
And
Everybody
data
has
isn't
data.
one thing. Data is 20 things. And that's what makes
Yeah.
it really hard, because there's lots of different formats, not just structured and unstructured, but there's different types of documents. There's dozens, if not more, types of applications that have data that are probably in databases somewhere. And all this stuff is this giant mishmash. And there's so many different ways that people can get access to it, whether it's a Word document or Excel spreadsheet, or it's a database that I use an application to get to, or a database that I run queries against for whatever reason, or it gets backed up. So it's such a multidimensional problem. It can't be lumped into one thing.
Yeah. I mean, the first step always is to do when you're looking at your data estate in general, the first thing that you need to do is understand where your data is, that data discovery methodology. You can't protect data that you don't know that you have. And no matter who's listening to this podcast right now, this webcast, whatever we're calling it, I promise you, you don't know where all your data is. The absolute greatest organizations at data management of all time always have times where they experience some kind of data leakage. Take something where you would think that data is the ultimate paramount, like the CIA or NSA. They lose data all the time through spies, through leakage, through whatever. And they are supposedly the experts at being able to do this. So understanding where data is, how it is being stored, where it's being stored, so on and so forth. That's step number one.
So let's get specific. So Bob's Microsoft shop. So they use Office 365.
Sure.
And they use, obviously email and Excel and SharePoint. So there's a bunch of data there, and that data lives in people's hard drives, and it also lives in the Microsoft cloud, because they put a lot of stuff in SharePoint, and they probably have people's work files that are backed up into OneDrive. So let's just start with just that piece for kind of regular, everyday, white collar office data. And some of that's going to be sensitive, and some of that's not going to be sensitive.
Yeah, and so you really do have to kind of understand what data is there and what it's going to look at. Let's take email, because email is the glorified file storage of the universe, right? And so email contains a little bit of everything from, Jason, where would you like to go to lunch, to have you seen this financials, to here is a list of, the credit card numbers of our customers, to whatever.
Don't
And
email that to me, please.
yeah, well, no, but don't, right? I mean, but again, and I don't do those things. I mean, I've understood that over time, but email is not a secure methodology of doing anything, but it's still one of those things that needs to be reconciled. And so understanding what data might be there and how you're going to protect that data based on the people that are using that kind of information is critically important. Generally speaking, where we go to lunch is not classified information or protected information, but somebody's credit card numbers or the financial statements or a code snippet that I send you or whatever could be intellectual property. It certainly could be business sensitive. And in the case of like the credit card numbers, the spreadsheet that we're keeping our customers' credit card numbers on, which by the way, please don't ever do that. But
Please.
you could be doing that. And I, again, too many instances where I've seen exactly that happen. That's obviously PII that needs to be, doubly protected because it's regulated and whatever have you. So that's you got to start with that kind of data and where it's stored and how you're going to deal with it and what have you.
Right. Now, so Bob's company has reasonable processes and people around that. So they're not doing dumb stuff like emailing around credit card numbers, but they do have intellectual property in the form of designs and software now. And let's say that their CAD systems for designing these things are running in a traditional on-premises environment. So you've got that data, and
Yep.
those are design files, and there's a lot of value in that. And those things are backed up, hopefully, and stored, maybe on premises, hopefully also off premises. So that's some sort of sensitive data that they have to worry about that has a lot of value to them, because you could have the malicious criminals who want to steal those designs and then manufacture them and steal market share from Bob.
Yeah, I mean, so then you once you have an understanding of what data is there, so on and so forth, then you need to start the process of classifying that data. And it could be something as simple as, public or irrelevant, or I don't know, classify it however you want. Where we're going to lunch is not something that I deem particularly sensitive. I mean, it's one of those things that, quite bluntly, the more people that join us for lunch, generally the better. I mean, I enjoy
It's like
that,
they're
right?
buying lunch. I mean, that
Yeah,
was
especially if they're buying lunch, right? But that code snippet that was passed between two developers is something that we don't want the rest of the world to have. So I would classify that as business sensitive. That financial information might be even more sensitive than that, depending on who it is and what it is, and how it's regulated and what have you. So
right.
after you've done your data discovery, then you need to do something along the lines of data classification, just getting a general policy, a general sense of, if you have this piece of data, it comes, I mean, think of it in three buckets. Not important, somewhat important, really important, or however you want to, small, medium, large, or however you want to take and classify your data. But your data has to take and go into some kind of policy, some kind of bit bucket to understand how you want to protect that data.
Yeah, and the stuff that we're emailing around and sharing and collaborating on is definitely one, big stew of lots of different things in there. And it's, Bob's House of Widgets is a privately held company, but
Sure.
let's say that they are fairly prominent. So the marketing plans for launching this new line of widgets is something they want to keep private. And to some degree, that stuff is going to rely on people's common sense practices. Let's talk a little bit. Let's shift gears. We'll talk a little bit and talk about data and things that are a little bit easier to classify because they're structured and they're contained. They're not this big this big stew of stuff that's in email. So we talked about the CAD designs, the data for that. So that's one class of stuff, and that's pretty easy to put some constraints and controls around, which is, okay, these are digital files. You can only get them through this application, and they're in some sort of control system, and you can't or shouldn't be emailing those or sharing them. Then you got application data, which is in some relational database running somewhere. Let's talk about that because there's so many different ways to get access to that through the application, which may or may not have good controls, and then database administrators who, of course, are admins in the database and can, in theory, get access to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you want to also keep in mind that you have to, somewhere in that process, determine who owns that data, right? Once you determine who owns that data, and you obviously kind of classified it, you've discovered it, you classified it, now you determine the ownership, then you can work on protecting it. So once you've established all those things and determine who wants to own it, and by the way, just so we're all very clear, 99 times out of 100, it is not your security team that owns your data. I mean, as easy as the easy button is to push to say, well, the security team, the InfoSec team owns that data, is going to secure it. You don't want the security team owning your financial data or your HR data or so on and so forth. In
It's
fact,
wrong. That's wrong at so many different levels. If
yeah,
someone does that, because
well, and I would argue too that you have regulatory requirements if you're subjected to SOX and a whole bunch of these other regulations that specifically says that they aren't allowed to own that data. So
right, they're not set up for it. They don't know, and you need to have a structure where you're enabling the application owners, the people who really do own the decisions around the data, to do this. And
that's right.
then whatever the mechanism or process is that they establish these controls, even if these things are just paper controls, you got to set up a culture where the application owners take responsibility for that.
That's right. And so we've talked about the three steps to the data part. The last part of all that is, how do you protect that data? You protect it by encrypting it. There's a lot of different ways, but I am here to tell you that the technology part of this situation is never the part that people fail. I mean, this is understood. This is the part that the technologists, your tinfoil hat types in the world, they get how to encrypt data. They get how to protect data. That isn't the hard part. The hard part is all the policies and procedures part, that the data discovery, the data ownership, the data classification. That's the part that takes so much time, so much effort, and is an ongoing process that when you start taking and doing a data security journey that's part of your zero trust journey, that's the part that takes and consumes the greatest amount of time. Encrypting a piece of data, once I have that piece of data, once I know how it should be encrypted, once I know how it should be protected, once I know who owns it, that's very straightforward. I mean, and again, without getting into it, there's a gazillion different technologies out there that can take and aid you in that. A lot of different vendors will help you with that. That's all very straightforward. In fact, to the point where your database systems, your email systems, even some of your application systems, so on and so forth, they all have the ability to, either help you or natively be able to do a lot of that. So again, once you've done the hard part, pressing the easy button is relatively easy.
And I think you're right that people start with the tool and technology, and I think that's because it's easier, but it's the wrong way to start. And
It's the wrong way to start every time.
You could have a very effective data security strategy with no technology whatsoever. You just rely on people and paper and process, and that would be okay in some situations. In Bob's case, I think that we can say they've done a good job over the decades of controlling their CAD data and their designs. This software development is relatively new to them, so they've got obviously a source code control system, but maybe they're not terribly terribly mature there. And then this new cloud-based system is brand new to them, and they know they're going to be collecting consumer data and maybe even metadata around whatever these widgets do in people's homes. And there's a lot of sensitivity to that, and that's topic for a whole other set of podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Around how you do that. But it is something where Bob and Bob CISO by extension are defining this and making sure that the application owners and the operations team has ownership and control of how that data is accessed, and that the security team is really there to support them and not the other way around.
Yeah, and so you come full circle when you start with a relatively greenfield, which is what we're talking about with Bob's House of Widgets, taking and understanding where data is going to be stored, understanding what the sensitivity of that data is going to be like, so on and so forth, and what that data is and whatever have you. And then who's going to own that data, then takes and gets you to the ability to be able to protect it. And then when you're looking at a lot of your cloud native apps, a lot of your cloud environments, they have the ability to help you with encrypting and protecting that data. So again, starting with that whole process from scratch actually is very easy. But the key is establishing those policies and procedures ahead of time, making certain those policies and procedures are adhered to, and then taking and moving forward with your project.
Exactly. And Bob definitely wants to avoid some of the egregious examples of consumers being able to access other consumers' data through either just errors or through a little bit of let's say, manipulation of the application.
Yeah, word of advice to Bob and everybody else out there, your cloud provider is not your security provider. And there's something called the shared responsibility model. I promise you that it's shared. There are responsibilities for you, there are responsibilities for them, but much of the day-to-day stuff is going to fall to the data owner, to the cloud, the instance owner, so on and so forth, not to the cloud provider. That means that when you get an S3 bucket, that you have to set the passwords to something other than defaults. So many of the data exposures that we hear about come from people not securing that data on your cloud instance because they didn't either set defaults or they didn't set a password at all. You wouldn't believe how many times that they do that. Our friends at Microsoft, our friends at Amazon, our friends at Google, they spend billions with a B talking to people about the shared responsibility model. And yet, again, 99 times out of 100 or more, when you see a breach on the cloud site, it came from the fact that there was a misunderstanding or a failure of the shared responsibility model.
Yeah, and these things it's complicated. The surface area and the overall complexity and richness of capabilities in those cloud environments is mind-boggling. And it's, Bob needs to, and hopefully is, hiring the right people and giving the people that he has the time to learn about these environments and get some outside help as well, where
Absolutely.
They can get these cloud service providers are great. They have services that are typically free or not that expensive to have their experts validate your architecture and help you understand things from not just a security perspective, but from an availability and a performance and a cost perspective. And
that's right.
Don't be afraid. Bob's not afraid, and you shouldn't be afraid if you're in this environment to rely on some experts to help you with.
Phone a friend, right? There is no reason that this whole zero trust thing is something that you have to do by yourself. This whole security thing is not something you have to do by yourself. Take and talk to experts Both Jason and I, you can always ping us. We're always available to take and chat a little bit too. We're always taking and willing to go out there and talk to people, but there's plenty of resources out there from the CSA, from number line security, from EMA, from the different cloud providers to you name it. There's a lot of different resources out there that'll help you on your zero trust journey with data and the other parts as well.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris. This has been great. I think we've touched on some significant elements of the data pillar, and Bob seems to have his wits about him and a good team to approach this properly. Any final thoughts?
No, again, data security is a challenge. It's always going to be a challenge. It's something that is top of mind for a lot of executives out there. Don't be intimidated by it. It's relatively straightforward, but as Jason alluded to as part of the conversation, this is not a technology problem. It is 99 times out of 100 a process problem. Trying to understand the processes that you want to go through in order to protect your data, it's a challenge, but it's not one that you can't accomplish. It's one that you can easily figure out one way or the other. It just is something that's going to take some time.
Yeah, and in some zero trust models, you'll see data is actually at the center, and data is the biggest part of what is at risk and what malicious actors are trying to get access to. It's not 100%, but it's way up there. And it's such a multidimensional problem that you have to look at it application by application, use case by use case, and then it becomes solvable. And email is, maybe that's not solvable, but
yeah,
application data is solvable because you now understand, okay, my application stores data here and it's accessed this way, and it's encrypted or not encrypted or obfuscated that way. And that is a controllable environment where you can be successful in securing application data. Absolutely. And by tying it into zero trust, you get the richness of properly authenticating, doing device and context evaluation for access, et cetera, all the things that we're going to talk about in the other pillars. But it really is a solvable problem when you look at it from that perspective.
You got it. Totally agree.
That is it for this session. Thanks, Chris. As always, we could talk about this for hours, and I think in total we will. But we'll sign it off for today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.